Thank you very much for the introduction. Um, what about an enterprise brain? Let me start like this. I I was finishing my studies in the mid of the 90s, and I then wanted to explain to my parents and my grandparents what I was going to do as a job. And I found that very difficult. My grandparents were born in the 1910s. They had never seen a computer nor an IT system. They had never seen an internet or an email or something like this. So how would I explain it to them? And I needed to find metaphors and analogies to make this, tangible for them. And one of my favorite analogies that I found was, the following story. So I told to my grandfather, grandfather, look, if you are getting sick, like a bad cough or, dripping nose, then you go to your cupboard or your drawer and you just take some pills and hopefully that helps. And maybe after a week, then you will realize it does not help, so you go to your Hausarzt, Dr. Müller, so the general practitioner. And whenever you go there, he does a little bit of an examination, does probably some tests, and then he says, this is what I recommend to you. You have to take this and that medicament, and here's the prescription. And in most cases, that helps. In some cases, it doesn't. So he says, this is nothing that I can cure for you. You need to go to a specialist doctor. And the specialist doctor then might be a cardiologist or a neurologist or any of the things, and they treat you then better. Sometimes, if things are really bad, then you need to have a surgeon. And somebody, then an operation needs to happen. Hopefully it works out. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard, like if you need a replacement for your knee or for your hips, then after that you probably need to change your lifestyle a little bit and you go into rehabilitation. And that was something that they would understand. And then I said to them, Opa, now imagine the patient is not a human being, it's an enterprise. What do? Well, they do about the same. First, they try to cure themselves with an IT department or an internal advisory. If that works out, all fine. If it doesn't, then they probably call in people like Andersen Consulting at the time, Accenture now, advisors who do basically the same. We do an examination and analysis, then we have some recommendations, and then you feel better. Sometimes, in case it's a larger operation that needs to be done, a larger project to be delivered, then it is probably time for a surgeon. And we have those specialist doctors also within Andersen Consulting. And we also do the rehabilitation for you in case something happens. And we do the knee surgery, the knee replacement surgery. Now imagine that was an IT system and not a human thing. And they seem to understand. So I really like that picture, being the kind of, let's say, an enterprise doctor. Now, if we take this a little further, then I think this is a very fitting example. So let's kind of X-ray not a human body, but an enterprise body. And if we do that, then we will find there's a lot of synergies. So you could say, like, the heart and the soul, that could be the people of an enterprise. And then you have the muscles. That would be kind of the technical machinery and equipment, the production lines, where things are being produced. We have blood and veins. That could be something like energy supply and waste management. We've got the eyes and the ears. That is probably something like market research and development. We've got the mouth. That should be probably marketing. Then we've got the nerves. Nerves are transporting data back and forth. And they're transporting it, so if you step on my toe, then I really realize that very quickly in my brain. So this is also the information transport system. But where is my brain? Where is an enterprise's brain? Where do we find that? And then we need to think a little bit about what is an enterprise brain? What does it do? And it's basically two things. One thing is it stores information, things you learned in the past, experience, know-how, expertise. And the other one is it grabs up data, combines it, collates it, makes it into information, and then passes it on in terms of commands. So if you step on my toe, I'm going to kick your shin. And brain somehow needs to tell my right foot, please kick, and not my left arm. Because it's going to be very difficult to bend down with my arm to kick somebody's shin. So if we can take this analogy a little further, then we see that there are 5 ingredients that are required. One is what I call the data autobahns. So we need the ability to pass data very quickly, ubiquitously, 24/7 from where the action is happening to the brain. That's what I call a data autobahn, like nerve center. We need to have something like a distributed agent system. So if you are stepping on somebody else's foot, there is a little sensor in your foot that says, "Aua." And that information is transported then to the brain to say that. So there are different agents that are working together. Some are more the utility agents in an enterprise. So, my pressure valve is going over the top. Alarm. And others that are then trying to put it together in terms of structured information. What has happened, what needs to happen. And then I was just telling you the story about kicking somebody's shin while you're stepping on my toes. There needs to be a navigational system. So the brain needs to know whom to tell to do something. And the information, somebody standing on my toes, needs to come up to my brain. So we need to have certain navigational system. We need to have automated security and access. That's what the white blood cells basically do in terms of, let's say, fighting intruders, identifying viruses, curing the body, something like this, security, you know what I'm talking about. And then at the end, we need some intelligence. The thinking process. So what do you do with the data? The muscles, as I said, technical machinery, equipment, IT systems. We have this now here on the bottom to just have a better look into what this means. So you've got a very agnostic picture of an enterprise IT layer down there. And if you really watch closely, there is a single symbol, an icon that says business APIs. And this is where you would typically find standard software products. And if you look into an enterprise, there are many different enterprise software that need to be connected with an IPA framework. And this is typically where we would then have the utility agents, the sensors that tell you something. Something's wrong, something's right, that are constantly measuring the activities. On top of that, we need this nerve system that here I depicted with connect and extract meaning from the muscles, from the enterprise systems. And then we need on top of that and that's what this pinkish kind of box says, we need a kind of brain that does something with the information. And what I said was, so we have this thinking process, bringing together conversation, bringing together analysis. This is what typically large language models do. And underneath it, there is this navigational system to know to whom to connect, how to process, and how to forward information. So then the layer below that is a semantic layer, a vectorized knowledge graph, kind of the navigational system. The next slide then is basically the same. I just put it a little bit to the side, but it's basically the same meaning. Now, what needs to happen if I step on somebody's toes? There needs to be an alert in the underlying applicational layer. Some bot, some sensor needs to tell me, oops, there's something going wrong. On top of that, we have the large language models that have the thinking and capability. And probably within an enterprise brain, we will see more than one large language model because they specialize a lot. So one is probably for visualization, one is probably for analytics, the other one is for conversation, and the last one is probably for decision making. And there might be a lot more in that large language model. Now we need to connect the information from the systems with the large language models. That's the agentic system. That's kind of the nerve system. You have utility agents on the bottom connected to the systems. And then you have some, let's say, synthesizing nodes in the middle. And then you have on top something that helps you collate information and create decisions. That's what we would call the supervisory agents. Yeah. And the supervisory agents would also then, within the enterprise brain, connect to the large language models. They would probably also connect to each other. And then you need to find a kind of navigational system that helps you to collate the information and to make the right decision. And probably, in reality, this is a lot more complex than I can show you on this little slide, but I think you get the picture. Now, if we think about an enterprise brain in that way, then you will realize that thinking and talking about AI and talking about agents is becoming a very different dimensions. And many of the conversations we have today is how can we employ agents, automatization, AI, machine learning within a process, within a system. That's something very different. If we think about an enterprise brain like this, that totally changes the picture. If you think an enterprise brain within a financial dimension, then you have to ask yourself the questions. Many of the custom reports that you are employing now, will they still be required in the future? Which of them do you really require? Which of them are becoming obsolete because the agents will do one way or the other? And that's the interesting dimension then. And then the entire perspective on AI, on agentic AI, the use of agents, becomes a different dimension and makes sense. There is a little bit of complexity though, because you see my agents connect to many different systems from different suppliers. Some of them standard software, some of them custom software. How do you run that? How do you connect that? And I will not tell you probably a secret if you look at that. The expectation is that many of the utility agents on the bottom will be supplied by standard software providers. But going forward, we will see a shift in the way we work, in the way IT is working, away from the bottom application layer into the supervisor agentic layer. Because that's where the difficulties is going to start. This is something super customer-centric, super customer individual, because you need to connect many different informations from many different pieces of information from many different systems and make sense out of them and take a decision. And you need to have, on the one hand side, this navigational thing, you need to have the analytics thing, and you need to then have a rule set that is sufficiently explored, tested, to make sure you don't get a false positive. And I think going forward, this is where a lot of work is going to go into compared to the standardization that we see currently in the market with regards to ERP systems and with the rise of software as a service systems, which are going to be prevalent for at least the non-differentiating functions within our enterprises. So we found the brain. We realized there's probably a large language model. There's the vectorized knowledge graph in terms of a navigation system. We can now ask ourselves, how many brain is an enterprise going to have? Is it only one? Or is it a function or a function-oriented brain? That I will leave to your discussion, because I don't have the answer yet, but it's at least worth a try. And we need to make sure we balance the intelligence of these systems with the complexities of building and managing and maintaining these systems, because after all, it's still software. Now, I know that there are still a lot of people on an S4 journey. And for some of them, this might be like walking a little bit in the mist, not knowing exactly where the target is. Others are probably in the final stages, and the thirds may have just already completed the journey and ask themselves, what's next? My recommendation to those that have already completed the journey, think about agentic, think about an enterprise brain. And my experience is that we are typically making it very, very complex. That's why I was using the example of a human brain to give you the idea of what might be next in terms of AI, agentic, and all these kind of things. However, not everybody is on an S4 journey that has already completed an S4 journey. So here are my 5 recommendations to those that are still on the journey. And the first one seems to be very obvious and very straightforward. Finish as soon as possible. Because as of today, there is a lot of effort going into the S4 transformational systems and transformational projects. A lot of budget, a lot of resources is locked in there. And these are resources that are not available for any discussion about an enterprise brain. So finish as soon as possible. The second is also very simple. Stick to standard wherever possible, even if it hurts. We've talked about the lean core. We've talked about standardizing and harmonizing processes. And that all makes sense, because then you can use the utility agent that the standard software providers are going to give to you, and hence reduce your implementation effort. But I would also like to give you a very vicious thought, because it might also make sense to not do lean core or greenfield. It might also make sense to just say, we keep the lights on, keep the system running. We do an upgrade as quickly as possible. See again, point number 1. Build a coffin then around it, put an agent on top of that that extracts the information, and then start the journey towards an enterprise brain, because also a human body is able to cope with disabled or malfunctioning organs, muscles, and extremities. But that's just a vicious, sometimes vicious, but maybe also wishful thought around stick to standard wherever possible. Rethink reporting and steering. What are the functions that are going to be taken over by an enterprise brain, so you don't need to build it, because the agents just react? And what are those functions where you will not use any artificial information? Because, for example, if you talk about financial information, the monthly booklet, the balance sheet, and all that kind of information, you will want to have them right, in the right format, with the right numbers, because there's an external auditor that gives you a certification. So better not have any probabilities in the way the reporting is going to be made. If you're on a brownfield journey, then and you're rethinking reporting and steering, then I would recommend to go back to step number 1. Finish as soon as possible. Start experimenting with agents now. SAP is already delivering the first agents. Experiment with them. It's not so difficult, but you get a feeling for what it needs to take to install them on the one hand side on the application level, but also to just exploit the data and collate the data and make sense out of them. And the last one is my favorite one because it means scaling across an enterprise. While I was preparing this speech, I was talking to a colleague who's much more an expert on all these data and agentic topics. And she was immediately intrigued by the word scale. So how do we scale that? So we're probably going to have utility agents coming from SAP, from Microsoft, from other, and they all have these different standards. So what is the operating model? Probably agents are going to be developed at the same time in multiple departments and multiple functions. How do we make sure that all these can connect and communicate with each other? There needs to be a certain operating model, a certain guidance. I was more intrigued about the topic across enterprise. What does that mean? What is the information we need to bring together in a brain that needs to be harmonized, standardized, so that we can start decision making, that we can start visualizing? Probably everybody of you has just explored a little bit with AI-based picture generation, as all of these are, by the way. And how many times have you seen a human being with 3 legs? That's something that should not happen. So this is what I wanted to cover in terms of the comparison of a human being with an enterprise being. And I wanted to just give you a little bit of an idea of what's next. What's the next big thing that we're talking about, that we see coming in terms of an enterprise brain. And I wanted to do this in a way that is not too technocratic, but I also wanted to make it for you in a matter that you can think about it. It was supposed to be a little bit thought-provoking, and I hope I did not fail. At the beginning I said, what about an enterprise brain? I do believe it's all about an enterprise brain. Or IT is all about an enterprise brain. Thank you for coming, thank you for listening, thank you for following my thought journey. It has been a pleasure. And I hope you could take something away with you to your next meetings. Everything that I've written down is in much more detail, much more complexity, and much more technology written in the Accenture Technology Division. It's publicly available. You can download it on the internet. If you have questions, please reach out. And yeah. Oh, one more thing. One more thing. I have to confess. Last time that I was in Ireland, I met an Irish tourist guide, and he told me to never let the truth get into the way of a good story. So I have to confess that my grandparents died before I had the chance to complete my university studies. So that was the made-up kind of thing. But I'm sure they would have liked the story, and they would have understood the story, and they would have fun to go to their friends and relatives saying, like, I don't know what our grandson is doing, but he's some sort of an enterprise doctor. Thank you so much.